The secret of the Backlands. Have you ever been to one of those family gatherings where everyone gets together, drinks, eats, and tells stories that shouldn't be spoken out loud? This video is about one of those stories. The difference is, this one came from someone who lived it and who spent decades trying to forget. I'm that person's granddaughter. My name is Helena Duarte. And today I'm going to share what my grandfather, Samuel Duarte, never had the courage to speak about again. Grandpa Samuel spent his childhood in the Backlands. Not the touristy countryside you see in movies, with colonial mansions and romantic tales. The real Backlands, arid, isolated, where houses are separated by miles and night falls like a black velvet curtain. It was the early 70s. He was about 12, living with his parents in a small, simple house. There was no electricity, no internet. Just emptiness, silence, and the distance between people. School was far. Everything was far. Near his house, about a 20-minute walk, lived a family called the Morgans. Nobody visited that house. Nobody was invited. The family had Thomas and Margaret Morgan, the parents. A daughter named Claire, my grandfather's age. And an older son named Ethan. Ethan was different. He was around 14 or 15. But was in the same grade as Samuel at school, which was strange in itself. A boy that aged doing so poorly he'd repeated grades several times. But there was more. He rarely came to class. When he did, he'd arrive with that empty stare, sweating, clothes torn and hanging on his body like they didn't fit, shirt sleeves dangling at his elbows, pants ending mid-calf. When he was in the classroom, he sat in the back, in the corner, away from everyone. Never opened his mouth. Didn't socialize. Just watched. And there was something nobody could ignore. His body was covered in black fuzz. Not quite hair. More like fur. Thick fur. His hands were too large for his body. Fingers too long. And there was always something strange about his nails, like claws beginning to emerge. There was something primitive about him. Something not entirely human. The other kids had cruel nicknames. One day, someone called him something that enraged him. In a burst of violence nobody expected, he broke another boy's finger from the neighboring class. Snapped it like a twig. After that, everyone kept their distance. July came. School vacation. There were days when the boys took advantage of the break to explore the Backlands, playing by the small lakes that formed between the rocks, bathing in dark cold waters, eating wild fruit. Samuel and a group of friends were at one of these places. It was late afternoon, that moment when the sky turns orange but darkness begins to creep in. They were so distracted they didn't notice when the sun disappeared. When they realized it had gotten dark, they were ready to head back. But that's when they saw something on the other side of the small lake, a shadow approaching. Walking on all fours, at first it looked like an animal. But as it approached the lake, the water, they realized it had human form. Or almost. The creature crouched at the water's edge and began to drink. Didn't use its hands. Just buried its face and drank like a thirsty dog. Drank desperately, hungrily. It was so far away it was hard to see clearly. But its movements were wrong. Distorted. Samuel heard his friend Marcus whisper beside him. "That's Ethan. That boy from school." The creature lifted its head. And although it was distant, both boys felt that stare fixed on them. That knowing gaze. After a moment that seemed eternal, the creature disappeared into the darkness. The boys ran. Samuel didn't stop running until he got home. And yes, he had to pass the Morgan house to get back. When he passed by, he saw Thomas and Margaret coming out of the house, searching desperately. He heard Margaret's desperate scream calling Ethan's name. He entered his house breathless, without telling anyone anything. A month later, Samuel was tending the family goats. He was in a remote area, under a tree, while the animals grazed. One of the goats got spooked by something. He never knew what, and bolted. He ran after it. It was important not to lose an animal. It meant beatings, punishment, hunger. When he finally caught the goat, he realized he'd arrived at the Morgan property. That's when he saw it, almost hidden among the trees, a small shed. It wasn't large. Looked more like a storage building. And where there should have been a door, there were iron bars. Thick, heavy, and a black tarp covering the interior. Samuel heard something that made him freeze, heavy breathing coming from inside, panting, like something exhausted. He shouldn't have done what he did, but he did it anyway. He pulled the black tarp aside slightly and peered inside. There, sitting on the ground, chained at the wrists and ankles, was Ethan, or what had been Ethan. He was enormous. Much larger than any teenager should be. He was covered in black fur. His hands had claws, real claws, not nails. His feet were deformed like a wolf's, and everything about him was muscle and brute strength. The creature was sleeping, or sedated, its head hanging between its legs. Samuel couldn't process what he was seeing. His whole body trembled, and then the goat he was holding bleated. The creature woke suddenly, with rage, with hunger. It rushed toward the bars, pulling the chains with all the brutal force it had. The gate shook. It snarled, showed enormous teeth trying to reach Samuel. Samuel dropped the goat and ran. Left the goat behind. Just ran. Time passed. Samuel tried to tell his parents, Joel and Rosa Duarte, what he'd seen. They didn't believe him. Thought it was a child's imagination. Stress. Unfounded fear. But that fear wasn't unfounded. Weeks later, animals started appearing dead on neighboring properties. Horses, pigs, sheep. All with a very specific pattern. There was a giant hole in each one's neck, as if an immense mouth had sunk its teeth there and ripped out all the flesh. The blood had been drunk, or sucked. Investigations pointed to a mountain lion, a wild puma species from the Backlands. The men of the region began organizing. Night hunts, horses, guns. They never managed to hunt anything. Then one night, everything got worse. A baby disappeared from a crib. 3 months old. The mother woke in the morning to discover her child had simply vanished. No marks, no blood, no traces. Panic seized the region. Days later, Samuel woke in the middle of the night. For some reason he could never explain, he decided to peek through his bedroom window, and he saw it. Lights on in the Morgan house, which should have been abandoned, which nobody visited. He woke Joe. Both watched. Joe said only, "Tomorrow I'll notify the police," and that's exactly what he did. The police in that time and place was basically Sheriff Raymond Cole and 1 deputy. Few people, few resources. But they decided to act. Deputy Cole and Joe decided to stake out the following night. They'd wait for the creature to try something. Samuel, without permission, followed them from a distance. When they arrived at the Morgan house, there was silence. Total darkness. Deputy Cole shouted into the house, "Police! Come out with your hands up." Nothing. Then he started counting. 1.2.3. On number 4, something exploded through the window. What came through that window wasn't a boy. It was a creature that must have been at least 7 feet tall. Black as night, covered in wet, sticky fur. Its snout was elongated, its ears pointed and enormous. Its eyes glowed in the dark like a cat's. Yellow, predatory. Its mouth had teeth like knives. And when it snarled, that sound was the most terrifying thing Samuel, and probably Deputy Cole, had ever heard in their lives. The creature walked on all 4s, then stood on 2 legs, then returned to 4. Its body was entirely muscle. Deputy Cole fired. The bullet missed. The creature snarled and began walking toward him. Joe, who was hidden on one side, shouted to get the beast's attention. It worked. The creature changed direction. Changed toward Samuel. Samuel froze. His body wouldn't respond. The creature began charging in his direction. Fast, impossible to dodge. That's when 2 shots echoed almost simultaneously. One from Joe's shotgun, another from Deputy Cole's revolver. The beast was hit. In one of its legs. It flipped like a car at high speed. Spun in the air. When it rose again, it was snarling and grinding its teeth in pain. Its gaze now fixed on Samuel. For a moment there was recognition in those eyes. As if the creature recognized the boy who had peeked through the black tarp. After that, the beast simply disappeared into the darkness of the Backlands. Samuel heard the howl. That sound that would haunt him for the next 50 years. After that night, there was a silent agreement between Joe, Deputy Cole, and apparently the authorities. The official story was that a delinquent teenager had disappeared, that he'd attacked a family, that he'd managed to escape from the police. End of story. Nobody would talk about the transformation. Nobody would talk about what they saw. Nobody would talk. Period. A month later, the Morgan house caught fire. Completely, as if someone had ensured no evidence would survive. They never discovered if Ethan returned alone to burn the house, or if it was something else. Over the years, Samuel heard rumors. Someone from distant relatives mentioned they knew someone who'd seen a limping young man in a southern city, months after the transformation, walking strangely with one foot always bandaged. They said he arrived in that region and that soon after, animals started disappearing again. That people disappeared. That a very large, very strange wolf was seen on the darkest nights. But Samuel never knew the complete truth. Grandpa Samuel carried this story with him his entire life. He told few people, because he knew nobody would believe him. People called him crazy, creative, someone who read too much science fiction. He didn't care, because he knew the truth. And that truth was, there are things in this world that don't fit the explanations we've retaught. There are people or creatures who change, who transform into something we can't explain. And sometimes the government, the police, the authorities, they know and they choose silence. Because the truth is more terrifying than any lie. That property in the Backlands still sits empty today. Nobody wants to buy it. It's as if the place holds the secrets of what happened there. There are ruins. A small shed, almost collapsed, that once served as a prison for something humans can't comprehend. Grandpa Samuel asked me to tell this story only to remember. To leave a record. So that nobody forgets that not everything we see during the day tells us the truth about the night. Not everything rational can explain what exists out there. Some things are better left unexplained. If this story awakens something primal in you, share it with someone who knows not all monsters are fiction. What secrets does your family keep buried?